You alright everybody, how you doing?
Might be giving yourself credit for. If you have something to
Here are the 10 books that I'm most excited to read in 2025. This first book I'm going to be going over, it has thwarted me on several occasions. I think I've tried to read it 2 or 3 times now, and I've failed every time. However, this time I'm going to do it. I am. So the first book is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. For those of you who don't know, Blood Meridian is essentially a very grim western that follows the kid and this whole troupe of other characters who are in a scalping gang that essentially hunt Comanches.
Oh! Ew!
This takes place in like the 1800s, and the writing is very grand and very cinematic. The scope is immeasurable, and the story is incredibly violent and dark. Everything about it is challenging. Will it be a challenge? Definitely. Will I finish it? Yes, I will. I'm confident of that, and you will likely see within the coming months that I've read this, and then I will tell you, I told you so. So this next one is notorious as a challenging read, and it's basically a meme, essentially, is that every book bro has a copy of this that they haven't read. And I want to be one of the few people who's got a copy and has read it. It's David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. I've started this, actually. I started it today along with another book that I'll be mentioning, and I got 17 pages in, and I thought that's some decent progress. That's 1% through, nearly 2. And if I do that for nearly 2-3 months, I'll have finished it.
Almost there. What? No.
Infinite Jest essentially follows this wide-ranging cast of characters. They are ensnared by the search for this movie called Infinite Jest, which is said to be so dangerously entertaining that it just transports you into a state of bliss. I love the concept of this. I think it's brilliant, and I'm so excited to read it. The text is disgusting. Look at that. I'm hoping that if I take this slowly and I gradually make progress through it, it won't feel as big of a slog. Now, the book that I'm most excited for this year, by far, without question, and I don't know why because I've only recently got this fixation on it, is James Joyce's Ulysses. I love this cover, by the way. It's a gorgeous cover. Just look at that. Isn't it beautiful? James Joyce, I've only read one book of his. I read A Portrait of the Artist very recently, and that'll be in my February What I Read This Month video. Portrait of the Artist really did excite me as a book, and the reason why is because it had such a beautiful use of language. Joyce's use of language was so varied and so diverse and really, really exciting that it really lit something up in me, and I just felt invigorated by it in a sense. And I think that's really special when a book does that to you. And Ulysses, as far as I'm aware, has approximately 30,000 unique words in it, which is insane for me to think about. One of the main reasons why I'm so interested to read this, not only to have the honour of having said that you've read Ulysses, I think that's just one of those things, it's like a rite of passage for some people. But the formatting of this book and the way in which Joyce uses structure is really fascinating. Like, there are sections where it's structured as just a regular novel, then there's stream of consciousness, then there's internal monologue, then there is these sections that are written like a screenplay. Then there are sections, and there's one bit that I noticed which has musical notation to denote how you are meant to read it. Joyce is messing with the form of the novel to make it an experience just to read it. For those of you who don't know, Ulysses is essentially Joyce's parody of Homer's The Odyssey. Now, Homer's Odyssey I have not read, and it parodies the Odyssey by taking the story of Odysseus, who travels for 20 years and returns home to his faithful wife, and flipping it on its head and making it about an Irishman named Leopold Bloom, who is this sort of meek figure who spends a day walking around Dublin because they don't want to return home to their unfaithful wife. And I just love this sort of mundanity of taking an epic that spans years and condensing all of it into one day. And the fact that this book is so long for a day's worth of events, to me, is staggering. To make sure I can go along with the book, I bought this, which is A Guide to Ulysses by Patrick Hastings. And I'm essentially going to read this in tandem with the book. So next, and this is the other book that I've started at the moment, this is William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. I have made several remarks about Faulkner that are very negative. I do not like the writing of his that I've read. Granted, I've only read one book, but it did put me off a bit. Essentially, Faulkner writes so beautifully that you don't understand what he's going on about because he's stuck in this world of poetry. The Sound and the Fury itself tells a story from 4 different perspectives, largely in stream of consciousness, and the characters themselves can quite often be seen as unreliable narrators. So you're trying to piece together a story from 4 perspectives, none of which you trust. I'm hoping that The Sound and the Fury is, to me, a better representation of Faulkner. I'm giving Faulkner a chance because I do think he is a brilliant writer. I just think his first book that I read, As I Lay Dying, wasn't for me. So the next one that I'm excited to read is John Steinbeck's East of Eden. I have several John Steinbeck books that I'm planning to get to. However, this one I'm particularly excited for. Firstly, I think the cover is gorgeous. Just look at that. The East of Eden is very long. It's about 600 something pages, 727 pages, yeah. And this is one of the main challenges that I'm getting to with all these books that I want to read. With books like this, they're meant to be classics, and classics, some of which I have engaged with, some of which I haven't. East of Eden is considered to be a masterpiece of a novel. I don't know much about East of Eden. I know that it was made into a movie with James Dean, and I think it was directed by John Ford.
Elia Kazan is a traitor.
It's known as an American classic. I've not read any Steinbeck yet. The next book that I'm planning on reading, that I'm very excited about because it's huge and I've been trying to set aside time for it. This is a lot of the situation. This is Charlie Kaufman's Antkind. Another one of those books quite similar to Infinite Jest. I think it is quite similar to Infinite Jest, which is based upon a sort of mystical film. In this case, this is a film that barely exists, only a frame of it exists. And a professor, a neurotic professor, goes on this sort of odyssey to restore the film based on recollection. Charlie Kaufman's writing, for anyone who doesn't know, Charlie Kaufman is a filmmaker and a screenwriter, primarily a screenwriter, who's written these sort of mind-bending and mind-expanding films. My favourite of his, I really like Synecdoche, New York. I think it's quite a special picture. And Kaufman's work is very clearly denoted by anxiety, and he himself clearly seems like quite an anxious person. This idea of trying to restore a film that barely exists, to me, is fascinating. So I'm excited to see how he would write a novel, and that's why I'm very excited to read Antkind. I have a 2-book collection here. This is specifically in mention to The Secret History. The Goldfinch, I think, is maybe a bit too long for me at the moment. I say that, I'm reading Infinite Jest.
Well, he's not being a hypocrite, and that's the worst part.
So The Secret History, I'm excited to read because dark academia is sort of a genre that I think I would be interested in. I haven't really dipped my toe into. I read Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. That was really bad. So I'm wanting to find a book that's a better entry point, and I think The Secret History is essentially the sort of the dark academia starter pack. Essentially, for those of you who don't know, it's about a group of clever, eccentric misfits. I nailed that transition, by the way. A group of clever, eccentric misfits at an elite New England college who discover a new way of thinking and living that is a world away from the humdrum existence of their contemporaries. They're sort of talking about on the back, sort of Dostoevsky and Euripides. The Secret History is one of those books that just everyone goes on about it, so that's why I'm excited to read it. What do we got next? A writer that I've talked about before, and again, I've only read... How many books have I read? I've still only read one of his books, but I loved it so much. The next book that I'm excited to read is Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. In this imaginative extravaganza, the devil, disguised as a magician, descends upon Moscow in the 1930s with his riotous band, which includes a talking cat and an expert assassin. Together they succeed in befuddling a population which denies the devil's existence, even as it is confronted with the diabolic results of a magic act gone wrong. Whenever Bulgakov uses animals, I'm interested, just because The Heart of a Dog, which is the one book of his that I read, I loved so much. It was so funny and so clever and really brilliantly written. That sort of Russian existentialist banter that goes on, to me, is really funny. The last book I'm going to be talking about today, I was going to say Herbie Melville. Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Moby Dick.
Moby what?
It starts with the iconic opening line, "Call me Ishmael." It's a story about Ishmael who goes on a whaling trip with Captain Ahab, and Captain Ahab is seeking revenge on a whale who took off his leg. This should be fairly obvious as to why I'm interested in reading it, just because, one, it's considered a classic of American literature. Two, the story itself I find really interesting. If it's going into the sort of introspection and the sort of aspects of the relationship between man and beast, then that's something I'm really interested in, and I would love to see explored on the page. But it's meant to be this epic quest, and it's meant to be so gargantuan and grandiose in its scale, and that's what draws me to it, really. And I think that reading these classics seems to have really helped my excitement for writing again. Considering my list, I'm thinking this will be a really great year for reading, because there's a lot of really long books that I'm going to plan on taking more time with, just to really appreciate the language. Ulysses itself, I'm so excited for. I can't even start on that, because I would bore you to death with it. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books. Did you like them or loathe them? And I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.